and anybody watching the webcast for the slight delay. A few technical gremlins, but we're good to go. So my name is Councillor Pat Cleary. I'm chair of the committee. I'll just read out the standard webcast notice. So this meeting will be webcast and a record retained on the council website for up to 2 years. By participating in this meeting, you are consenting for your name, the content of what you say, and your image to be broadcast and stored on the council website. If any member, officer or member of the public addressing the committee has concerns with this, please contact the committee services to my left immediately. For those at home viewing the webcast, I would like to inform you that if you look above the video, you will see a resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear in the right-hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and debate. Can I please remind everyone that they need to turn on and speak directly into their microphone when speaking, otherwise what they say will not be captured on the webcast. Please can I also ask that you turn your microphones off when not speaking to avoid feedback. Right. Item 2 on the agenda is apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Cherry Povell and from Roger Bannister. Are there any other apologies? No. Could I welcome Councillor Jill Wood, who's attending Pensions Committee for the first time. You're very welcome, Jill. Item 3 is the Members' Code of Conduct, the Declarations of Interest. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests in connection with any items on the agenda and state the nature of the interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Rowlands.
Pecuniary interest, I have, my wife works for the council and it's in the pension scheme.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Councillor Collinson.
I'm a deferred member of the pension scheme.
Thanks very much. That it? Okay. Thank you very much. Right, item 4, minutes. We're asked to approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of September 2021. Can I move approval of those minutes and ask for a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Green. Can we agree the minutes by assent?
Yeah, we're happy with that, I'm sure.
Are we still... You're not able to look at the council at the committee agenda papers, is that correct? Yeah, you're happy to approve the minutes. Okay, so we'll crack on while you get some assistance there, if that's okay. Right, we're on to item 5, which is public questions. I don't have any questions from members of the public. I don't have any statements and petitions, but we do have a question from a member, from Councillor Joe Bird, that's been submitted in accordance with Standing Orders 12.3 to 12.8. So can I invite Councillor Bird to address the committee and ask her question, please? You're welcome, Councillor.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question is regarding investments in companies trading in the occupied Palestinian territories. And there has been questions, motions and protests by members of Merseyside Pension Fund and the wider public on this issue. There's been 2 consecutive and critical engagement reports by the Local Authority Pensions Fund Forum. There's advice and reports from the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the situation in the occupied territories, and government advice from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office says there is a high risk of trade within the occupied Palestinian territories. There's also been extensive engagement by the United Nations, resulting in a list of 112 companies linked to illegal settlements. And recently, adverse findings against 2 British-based companies by the Department for International Trade and the OECD. Merseyside Pension Fund, we know from previous questions and reports, that has around £2.7 million of investments in 7 companies on the list provided by the United Nations. So that's of a scale and a nature unlikely to cause significant financial detriment to Merseyside Pension Fund members. So my question is, in accordance with the policies agreed by Merseyside Pension Fund and the Northern Pool, would this pension committee agree to consider a report, not make a decision, but consider a report at its next meeting, scheduled for February, regarding adjusting its own and its pooled investments in such companies? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Bird. Your question is addressed to the committee, and I consider it appropriate that the committee discusses and determines the matter. As you know, we have our updated investment strategy statement on the agenda for consideration this evening, which includes the fund's approach to responsible investment. So I will therefore ask the committee, once it has considered and determined the updated investment strategy, that we also consider the question you have raised. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much. I do hope to resume as a full member of Pensions Committee in time for its next meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so given the questions we've just had, and given what I've suggested that we take the issue posed by Councillor Bird forward in conjunction with the investment strategy statement, which is agenda item 9 in your papers, my suggestion to the committee would be that we bring item 9 forward and consider that immediately, and just change the agenda to that effect. So that's what I would propose. Can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Walsh, thanks very much. Can we agree that by assent? Lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, so item 9 is the investment strategy statement. So I would propose that we consider and determine on this, and then consider the question that has been raised just now. So just to remind the committee that we're being asked tonight to approve the investment strategy statement as contained in your agenda pack. So I'll invite our Director of Pensions, Peter Wallach, to introduce this. Thanks, Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report brings a revised investment strategy statement to committee. The investment strategy statement is a fundamental document for the Pensions Committee. It sets out overriding principles which direct the way in which the pension fund undertakes its investment strategy. Section 3 of the report provides some background information. Members will recall that at our September committee, the Northern LGPS responsible investment policy was discussed and approved, and officers undertook to revise Merseyside Pension Fund's investment strategy statement in the light of that revised responsible investment policy. Section 3.2 and 3.3 set out the elements that are required to be contained in an ISS. So those are covered from items A to F, and then, as I say, 3.3. There's a requirement for the statement to be kept under review and revised at least every 3 years. 3.5 just confirms that it's intended to provide a prudential framework within which administering authorities can set their policy on asset allocation, on risk, diversification, amongst other things. Since the fund's investment strategy statement was first issued, there have been changes in several areas which are set out under section 3.6. We've had changes to the guidance issued by our regulator. There have been the development and approval of the fund's responsible investment beliefs back in 2019, and there have been some legislative and policy developments in respect of stewardship and climate risk in particular. In relation to the investment strategy statement, which is attached as an appendix to the report, it picks up things from both the funding strategy statement, from the Northern LGPS responsible investment policy, and our internal compliance manual. There will need to be policies that underlie the investment strategy statement and those principles, such as the Northern LGPS responsible investment policy. Under section 3.8, we set out the way in which we recommend that the policy is both implemented, monitored, and reported to elected members. It's already an agenda item on the investment monitoring working parties. It's proposed that the existing reporting is enhanced so that the Northern LGPS responsible investment reports are also included, as well as the LAPF updates, any PERC updates, and indeed where we receive communications or representations from stakeholders, we'll provide information on that to members as well. Section 4 of the report indicates, in terms of financial implications, the investment strategy is fundamental to the management and performance of both the fund's assets and liabilities. Section 5 indicates that there is a statutory requirement to publish an investment strategy statement. Section 6 indicates that we devote some resource to this area of the fund, but clearly if there are further demands put on that, then there'll need to be additional resources provided. In terms of engagement and consultation under Section 8, this has been both discussed with elected members at a previous workshop. We have consulted with the pension board and also consulted with a number of the major employers in the scheme. So I'm happy to go through the accompanying appendix, Chair, but we have discussed it at the workshop. And as you say, the recommendation is that the strategy is approved. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Peter. And could I just place on record my thanks to officers for their engagement with members throughout the process of revising the investment strategy statement, including the workshop that Peter mentioned, which engaged not just with members of the committee but members of the pension board as well. I certainly found that extremely useful and extremely informative, and it's very good to see the enhanced investment strategy statement come forward before us tonight. I think particularly as well what you mentioned about the enhanced reporting around responsible investment issues. I think that's something I very much welcome, given the increased focus that we are increasingly getting on RI issues. So, having said that, I'll open it up to any comments, questions. Councillor Kenny.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously we're on agenda item 9 now and we're being asked to approve that. I just want to be clear, please. Is there anything in this report or the recommendations which would in any way conflict with the comments and the request made by Councillor Baird earlier, where I think she's asking for us to consider a report at our next meeting regarding adjusting our own and pooled investments in such companies? Because what I wouldn't want to do is go down the road perhaps of agreeing this now and then find when we go back to the comments that Councillor Baird made earlier that we're talking about a different situation. So perhaps if you could clarify that, please, Chair.
I'm happy to do so from my point of view. I mean, having assessed and considered the new investment strategy statement in considerable detail, it's perfectly reasonable in my view that members of the public, members of the council, members of the committee bring forward issues of concern that fall within our responsible investment policy, and that it is perfectly reasonable to ask for officers to report back on that so that members can consider all of the factors that are involved when we look at issues of ESG considerations, which have ethical and responsible investment factors. They also have financial implications, and the whole thing has to be considered in the round. And I think that's what's being asked to come forward, which we'll discuss in due course. I mean, that's what I would say on the matter. Peter, do you want to comment?
No, I think that's a very fair summary. I would also confirm that we've revised the investment strategy statement to reflect the changes made to the Northern LGPS RI policy in relation to environmental, social and governance factors, and those would in no way militate against the question that's been asked.
Thank you, Councillor Kenny. Anybody else wish to comment, raise a question? Councillor Green.
Thank you. And you mentioned about the apologies our spokesman has. So can I just, a couple of things really. First of all, can I join you in thanking the officers for their engagement about putting this together when I came back on this committee this year, in terms of the regular updates we get, the regular conversations we have about this, and the invites to all members. I've found it really helpful in terms of understanding some of the issues that we're working through, rather than just come into something fresh and say, that sounds bonkers. And so you start to understand. And the biggest benefit for me, and I think this is borne out with what you're saying around ESG, is data. So a lot of the people that come and speak to us at the various groups talk about the data, what the data is showing in terms of how companies are engaging with us as a pension fund or our representatives, so we could actually try and improve the situation for people in those circumstances. So we get feedback on the engagement and what companies are prepared to do or otherwise, and then fundamentally it's us as it's a sort of festival of capitalism, isn't it, really? Us choosing to invest our money where, in the end, we want to and where we're going to get the best return. So I personally have felt I have learnt an awful lot through this process, and I wanted to thank the officers for that. In terms of the specifics that Joe has asked about, just reading through it, I don't think it precludes that reading through the document, but what the document does suggest is before any precipitous step is taken around that we would actually have proper information and a rounded report so as we can make an informed decision one way or the other, rather than a sort of whimsical, taking a political view, which we're entitled to obviously, but also seeing that against the facts and the information. So from my reading of this, there's nothing that precludes, as you've said, Chair, there's nothing that precludes that conversation taking place. But you wouldn't want, I don't think, I wouldn't want Joe to go away from this meeting thinking it's a decision that's been made. We are just going to get some more reporting and some more information, and then we can take a view, as long as it's legal and so on and so forth, about what decision to take. So I know it's something Joe feels strongly about and has, I think, brought it up pretty well at most meetings. But what I'm reading from this, there isn't it isn't a done deal in those terms, but it is an opportunity to have that conversation about where we place our investments if there is a particular issue that's highlighted. Is that right, Peter? So we're not disinvesting from anything at the moment. We're going to use this as a framework to have those conversations when we've got the data and we've got PERC and all those other people that actually give us lots of really good information and so on. Is that fair, or have I missed something? Thanks, Chair.
No, I think that is perfectly fair, Councillor Green. Before Peter comes in, then I very much welcome your comments around how useful you found the whole process. And I think, I hope everybody who's engaged with that would say the same. I certainly would. We do intend some really in-depth and really interesting workshops and engagement around the whole sphere of investment, including responsible investment. And I just think it's really important, and that's why I'm really pleased that we're going to get enhanced reporting around responsible investment to this committee, because then the public can see, they can see in more detail the kind of information that's coming back to us, and they can see the kind of engagement and interest there is around those issues. So I think that's really important. I think in terms of what we're doing now, we're being asked to, hopefully in my view, approve the investment strategy statement, and then subsequently to consider the question that Councillor Bird has brought before us. But I totally agree with you that all we're really going to be asked to do is bring a report and then to consider the report. So I'll stop there. Do you want to add anything to that, Peter?
No, I think other than to say the investment strategy statement does indicate that the normal process is for the fund to engage with companies in order to understand their position, in order to encourage them to change their behaviour, to make them aware of what are called normative standards, what good corporate governance looks like, and to ask them why they're not complying with that. That engagement is escalated depending on how amenable the companies are to that engagement. But as the strategy sets out, ultimately, it may be, if I can just, ultimately, where asset owners refuse to engage or change, MPF will consider adjusting its investments as appropriate to the risks in accordance with its responsible investment policy and fiduciary responsibilities.
Hey, Chair, thank you for that. I think it is that whole, rather than someone saying today, I think we should stop doing this. There is a whole series of engagements, which you've pointed out, Chair, will be available. Certainly the conversations we have at those meetings that you've invited us to, which is really interesting. And the risk of not doing something with some of these investments. So we might have an investment. The risk is, let's think big oil as an example, or carbon. The risk is we're left there with an investment that as the world moves on, we need to move. So, you know, the risk to the fund of not doing something and not taking account of some of the risks that are being run, if someone's being highlighted by the UN or whatever it is, I think has been really useful. But key for me is the engagement and the escalation, as opposed to coming in at the top saying, let's disinvest. Well, actually, let's all find out a little bit more about what's going on first, engage with the company, and then work our way through. And I think that's what's entailed in the, as you pointed out. We might choose to, you know, adjust our investment at the very end, but there is a process that we'd go through before we reach that stage. I think that's what you're saying, wasn't it, Peter?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Does anybody else? Chris Carubia, Councillor Carubia.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really interested to see how far we go on the companies that we're dealing with. In other words, if we come against a company that is making every effort to change its way of working, and we're okay with that, but where do we draw the line on companies that may not be acting quickly enough, or how is that decision process made? Because I don't understand that myself, so I was just wondering.
Well, I think that's kind of the question that's going to be before us, in a sense, looking at that in a bit more detail on a specific issue of concern. That's, I suppose, you know, at the end of the day, resources within the fund and within the broader local authority pension fund forum are inevitably limited. And despite all the excellent engagement that Councillor Green has referred to that takes place, it's a limited sphere as such. So I think it's absolutely right and proper that we dig a bit deeper on some specific issues, and you know, we've had a specific one brought before us tonight, and you know, personally, as I've said, I think it's right and proper that we ask officers to go back, give us a bit more information, well, hopefully a lot more information on the specific issue, and I think that will be of use to all members to really kind of, I suppose, stress test the kind of engagement that does take place, and see, does it satisfy ourselves as a committee as to how useful that is, and what the outcomes are.
Yeah, if I may, I'm really interested on how far down the supply chain we're going to be going with this, because you could end up with a company that is trying to make all the efforts, but then its feeder businesses don't. So how do we deal with that as a do we invest in that major company if it's feeder companies or its supply chain is? That's sort of my thoughts, which I'm sure will come out in the wash. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. And absolutely, that's the kind of detail and information that we would hope to procure in due course. So, Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one for Peter on that. So, Peter, with the investment strategy there, are you saying that effectively a decision on whether to invest in a particular fund or company or area will be purely based on risk to the actual fund, rather than whether it was subjectively there was a subjective opinion that it was not particularly the right thing to do, obviously depending on the behaviour of that company, but it would be based on risk to the fund. That's the primary consideration.
Certainly the guidance that underpins the investment strategy statement indicates that financial return should be the primary consideration of pensions committee, and yes, risk would be the normal reason for avoiding investing in a business. But under the pooling guidance, the way that the government has set out pooling, they've attempted to divorce committees from decisions around the appointment of investment managers and decisions on individual holdings. So the intention is that committees set an overall strategy and parameters and guidelines, and then pools and officers implement those decisions. Now, what we're talking about tonight is a greyish area, but nonetheless, that's the kind of principle of what the government is looking for. So as an officer, I'd have an expectation that committee would set parameters for me and my team and for the pool that we are part of around the way in which we would view risk, we would view acceptable behaviour and either exclude or otherwise companies on the basis of that.
Hey, thanks for that, Councillor Cox. I haven't got any other indications to speak, so if I could just proceed with the recommendation specific to the investment strategy statement, which is very straightforward, that the Pensions Committee approve the investment strategy statement. Can I propose that? Can I have a seconder? Councillor Jones, Adrian Jones, thank you very much indeed. Could we agree that by assent? Excellent, all agreed. Thank you very much indeed. So just moving on then to the specific issue that's been raised tonight by Councillor Bird. I think it's fair to say it's one of long-standing concern, and there is a history of attempted engagement with relevant companies. So I have discussed this with the head of pensions, as we all have this evening, and he is content to bring a report to the February meeting of this committee. I've also asked that a workshop on the topic for members be held as soon as practicable and no later than the middle of January, and again the head of pensions is content to proceed on that basis. So I think that represents a reasonable way forward. I have a specific form of words which would give effect to that, which I'm happy to propose. Once anyone else wants to speak on the matter, or given that we've discussed it already at some length, are you okay if I just propose that? Okay, so apologies for the kind of the language. These things are never that straightforward, but bear with me. So the proposal is that officers bring a report to the next meeting of Pensions Committee which addresses the points raised and related matters at agenda item 5.3 at the committee meeting of the 29th of November 2021, thereby allowing the committee to determine what, if any, adjustments in investments might be recommended to officers. So that's what I'm proposing. Can I get a seconder on that? Councillor Jones? Thank you. Anybody else want to comment, or can we proceed to... Yeah, Councillor Green.
Yeah, the wording seems perfectly reasonable, and the idea of a workshop, I think, is really helpful to get behind the slogans to actually get to the issues. But just to be absolutely clear, are we at this stage talking about having a predisposition? So we're not trying to find a way to disinvest from these companies or adjust our position in these various companies. What we're actually looking for is a report, a holistic report that will talk about the various issues that will then subsequently allow us to make some sort of recommendation regarding what to do or what not to do, with a range of potential options, I suppose, one of which might well be to adjust our position, another one might be to do something different. Is that right? We're not predetermining, that's the word I was looking for, the expression. We're not predetermining what will be in that report, and it will be quite wide-ranging, talking about all the various issues, if that's at all possible in this area.
Yes, thanks for that, Councillor Green. Absolutely. In plain English, we're simply asking officers to bring forward a report for us to consider the issue in more detail and therefore to allow the committee to determine what any next steps might be.
That's helpful. Thanks, Chair. That's helpful. It was just that I think Joe did say about, bring forward a report about how to disinvest from the West Bank and so on. So I just wanted to be clear that we were going to have a holistic report that will give us a series of what the issues are and a series of ways of tackling the various information once we know what it is, if you know what I mean.
Okay, well, I mean, we're asking for a report to be brought forward to us as a committee. It's up to us as a committee what we do with that report and where we take it. Yep. So, sorry, I've proposed and it's been seconded by Councillor Jones. Unless anybody else, do you want me to say again? You want me to read it again? No. Yeah, we'll all agree that by assent. Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. That concludes item 9. So we will move back to the agenda as published, which takes us to item 6 on your agenda, pages 7 to 12, and that's the Local Government Pension Scheme update. So I'm going to hand over to our Head of Pensions Administration, Yvonne Murphy, who's going to take us very slowly and very carefully through this very technical item. Over to you, Yvonne.
Thanks, Chair. This report focuses on the Scheme Advisory Board's cost management process for the 2016 scheme valuation and the reform of the Treasury's cost management process, which overlap and impact on one another. As the Chair just commented, this is a complex subject, so it may be useful if I provide some context. The scheme valuation referred to in the report is based on a model fund representing the LGPS at a national level. The scheme valuation assesses the cost of the overall benefit package and can only result in changes to benefit levels and employee contributions. The national scheme valuation is a totally separate process to the triannual valuation, where each fund actually calculates the funding level for the fund and sets employer contribution rates based on the membership profile for each employer. Unlike the national scheme valuation, the triannual valuation cannot amend the benefit package or employees' contribution rates. In a nutshell, one focuses on changes to the scheme which directly affects our members and our employees, and the other affects employers' contribution rates to the scheme. To complicate matters even further, the LGPS is subject to 2 cost management processes, one managed by the Treasury and an LGPS-specific one managed by the Scheme Advisory Board. If we look at paragraph 3.2, it clarifies that when the government implemented the new 2014 scheme, the benefit package was built up to align with a cost of 19.5% of pensionable pay, and this is known nationally as the target scheme cost. The Government Actuaries Department measures experience against this target scheme cost every 4 years to ensure the scheme remains affordable to employers and the taxpayer. Any change in the target cost is shared between members and employers. Employers bear the cost of changes in the discount rate and price inflation, and the discount rate relates to the investment returns. Scheme members are on the hook for risks relating to wage growth, changes in life expectancy, ill health retirements, and commutation of pension to lump sums. Now, the original result of the 2016 SAB process saw a reduction in the cost of a scheme by 0.9% of pay, and a number of benefit improvements were agreed, increasing employer costs by an equivalent amount. However, the process was paused due to the McLeod judgment, but following the ministerial statement earlier this year outlining the details of that remedy, the process was restarted again. The government has confirmed that the McLeod cost will fall to members, increasing the scheme cost to 19.4% against the target cost of 19.5% to pay. And despite this slight shortfall, The Scheme Advisory Board will not recommend any scheme changes as part of the 2016 cost management process, but they do plan to revisit Tier 3 ill health provisions and the contribution rate for lowest paid members at a future date. Despite exercising its legislative duty to complete the process, the Scheme Advisory Board is concerned that the MacLeod cost have been allocated as a member cost, and also the Fire Brigade Union has instigated a judicial review against the government's decision. The other connected topic within the report, starting at paragraph 3.10, relates to the Treasury's review of its cost control process. The review was undertaken as the mechanism is deemed not to be operating in line with its original objectives, as it was only intended to be triggered by extraordinary events and not following the first round of the process as it has been this time. The Treasury has confirmed it will proceed with 3 reforms, namely moving to a reform scheme design only, and that excludes the cost of the legacy schemes. The cost corridor is to be widened from 2% to 3% of pay before they take any actions to change the benefit package. And also there's going to be an introduction of an economic check so that when the corridor is breached, a further check of economic conditions will be carried out before any breach would be implemented. You will note under the financial implications at section 4 that the Government Actuaries Department, their analysis of the reform mechanism is that it's only expected to breach around one set in every 40 years. As such, cost breaches will be less frequent but more material when they do occur, and this provides a reduced cost control whilst member benefits will be more stable going forward. That's an overview of the issues. Happy to take any questions. As the Chair said, I do appreciate it is complex and there's a number of different processes in operation at the same time. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. Yeah, just on those different processes, you mentioned the 2 cost management processes. Is that kind of 2 different ways of trying to arrive at the same thing? So it's kind of a safety check in a sense. Is that the way it works?
That's absolutely right. The Scheme Advisory Board is related specifically to the LGPS. Well, the Treasury's cost control process is aimed to keep costs consistent right across the public sector. So the Scheme Advisory Board, they look at the cost of the scheme, and if they can come up with amendments maybe to they'll cost it, and if they do think it's gone either 2% either way the corridor, they'll come up with some kind of amendments. Maybe it'll be to the accrual rates, the amount that it fills up, or they may change members' contributions. But they will do this to basically avert the Treasury making the decisions around the cost, around the benefit structure of the scheme. But as you say, the Treasury is a backstop that if Scheme Advisory Board doesn't implement the required changes to keep costs within the 19.5%, that they can come along and basically just change the accrual rates. So yes, that's right.
Lovely. Thanks for that. So there's kind of reassurance within the structure that yeah, all these things work okay. Okay, Councillor Carubia.
Thanks, Chair. Just on 3.13, Yvonne, it says the government's aiming to implement all 3 proposals in time for 2020 valuations. That's already gone, isn't it? So if that's the, well, it has. So when are we expecting that to come to fruition?
It's a bit different because the 2016 value, the 2016 valuation is in relation to the 2030. It's dead confusing. It's in relation to the 2013 triennial valuation. So they look at all the results of the model fund from the 2013 valuation, but then that as part of the scheme valuation, that's look at 2016. So the 2020 valuation will look at membership that has been provided for the 2016 valuations within the fund. So they're out of sync. We do triannual valuations every 3 years, obviously triannual, and the scheme valuation's done every 4 years, but they're out of sync. But the government, the scheme valuation is behind the triannual valuations, if that makes sense. the timeline.
It does, but I just wonder what the impact would be on the levelling up system that it says.
Say that again.
I understand what you're saying, I
Yeah.
appreciate what you're saying, but I'm
Okay.
just wondering what the implications would be with them being well behind.
Okay, so the 2016 valuation, scheme valuation, should have had an impact on the valuations at the 31st of March 2019, but because of the pauses in the process, the scheme changes weren't brought into effect. There was a number of scheme changes that they thought that they were going to bring in because of the 0.9% to pay. It was basically around death grants, removal of tier 3, that's why they're bringing that back in. Some changes around contribution rates and also around percentage reductions. And because of it was delayed then because of the McLeod issue. The changes weren't brought into effect in 2019, and now the McLeod issues have basically said, you know, the costs have to go into member costs for the 2019 scheme. They've moved the cost of the scheme from it was 18.6 back to 19.4, but they've said because of the timelines where it should have been brought back in at 31st of March 19, the administration burden would be too huge to try and revert back on on the benefit structure, so they've just basically said we'll leave it for the 2019 valuation, and at 2020 when they do that scheme valuation, any changes may come in then from 2022 at the 2022 valuation, if that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
I'm sure it all makes perfect sense, Yvonne. Yeah. And just to kind of reiterate what you said earlier, that the fact that these costs are being added to member costs is being challenged legally. Yeah.
That's right, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Green.
Thank you. It is probably the right thing to do, but it is a pain putting these masks on and off. So I suppose it does, you're right, it does sound incredibly technical. You know, forget the number you first thought of and add 2 or whatever it is. I suppose one of the key issues for us as councillors would be what the net impact of that is to the employer's contribution and therefore the council's revenue budget, in effect, or employers' revenue budgets. Specifically for us, it's the council, isn't it? So, whilst these are, you know, sound to be quite arcane and incredibly technical, are there any direct implications coming out of this about the impact that will have on employers' contributions? And if so, when is that likely to land?
Right, the scheme valuation within the LGPS doesn't have any impact on the employer's contribution because it's all around member benefits. Back when they done the original 2016 valuation, it was saying that the costs have fallen by 0.9% for the employer, so they were increasing a package of measures to bring that cost back up to the employer. So the scheme valuation for the LGPS doesn't have any impact on the employer's contribution rates. That's not the same for the public sector scheme because their discount rates are based on something called a scape rate, which is basically determined by long-term expectations of GDP. So for our scheme, the scheme valuation won't have an impact on your employer contribution rate. What does have an impact on your contribution rate is the local fund valuations, because that obviously measures your funds and values, where you are with your funds and values, and the experience for members within the LGPS. So at the end of the scheme valuation, depending on where we are with the funds and levels, that's what will impact on you as an employer. We have done an interim valuation based at the 30th of September. And things look in a good position at the funds, and that's particularly due to the fantastic investment returns that we've received over the last couple of years. So on a funding level, on a whole fund position, we are in surplus, but the expected return for the future service rate has fell. So it would look like your future service rate contribution rates are going to go up by around 1.4% to pay. but you have got the facility there because you've got a surplus to offset some of the surplus from that increase. So we're in discussions at the moment with the actuaries and the finance directors of the councils of what that may look like and what parameters there is there. To obviously we understand at the moment that it's, you know, employers have really, you know, budget constraints, affordability issues. So we do take that into account as part of the valuation. But to answer your question, we're all right on the funding position, funding levels. We're in a good position, but future service rates, because of expected outlook returns fell, you're going to see an increase in future service rates as it is at the moment.
And sorry, through you, Chair. And when are those future service rates likely to come through the post to us?
Valuation is 31st of March 2022, and the contribution rates are payable from the 1st of April 2023. So you'll see them coming through from April 2023.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that certainly is, considering everybody's budget situation. So I think the key thing obviously is that the fund is fully funded, more than fully funded at the moment. So, okay, thanks very much for that, Yvonne. Thanks for the questions, members. I don't have any other indications to speak, so I'll move to the recommendation, which is that the Pensions Committee be recommended to note the results of the employer cost control element of the 2016 scheme valuation and the impacts of the impending changes to the cost control mechanism to take effect for the 2020 scheme valuation. So I'll move that recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Green. Can we agree that by assent? Lovely. Thank you all very much. That is agreed. Okay, item 7 is the local pension board minutes. So that's in your pack, that we are asked to note the minutes of the most recent meeting of the pension board. Can I just point out to everybody that the next meeting of the pension board is this Wednesday, 1st of December at 10:30 a.m. That will be a virtual meeting, so if anybody wants to join me in attending that, please do make sure you get the virtual meeting details. Are there any questions, comments on the pension board minutes? So I will move that we note the minutes. Can I have a seconder? Yep. Councillor Green, thank you. Agree by assent? Thank you all very much indeed. Okay, item 8 is members' learning and development. So I will hand over to the Director of Pensions, Peter Wallach, for this. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm conscious that this almost seems to be a standing item on Pensions Committee, and it isn't intended to be, although it perhaps underlines the importance of learning and development for elected members. Informed decision-making is seen as fundamental to the good governance of the LGPS. Under section 3 of the report, just a reminder to members that we're scrutinised by a number of bodies, as well as a general expectation around decision-making in the LGPS. We have the Markets in Financial Instruments Directive, which requires us to evidence the knowledge and understanding of elected members. The Scheme Advisory Board that Yvonne has just been referring to is undertaking what's called the Good Governance Project, which is looking at models of good governance within the LGPS, and that has already provided an interim review, and the expectation is that there will be, as well as the statutory requirement for board members, it'll be strengthened in relation to committee members. The pensions regulator is also clear in terms of its expectation of the LGPS. Members will be aware that I bring a report generally to the first committee of the calendar year, setting out training opportunities over the year. That is intended to remain in place, but as the report sets out in section 3.8, there's a proposal to introduce an online training service, which is provided by a firm called Hymans Robertson. Section 3.8 sets out the 6 training modules that it will cover. I think the advantage of online learning is that it provides greater flexibility to elected members. It enables you to, for those members that don't have the time to attend face-to-face training, it can be undertaken in your own time. It's in bite-sized modules with which helps to track sort of progress through the training and also covers areas that may not be covered at some of the conferences that we attend. I have consulted with both the chair of the committee and the pension board in relation to the training, which will be, as I say, provided both to officers, to elected members and to members of the pension board who have a statutory requirement. So I'm asking committee to support the rollout of this online learning. If members agree to it, then we'll provide Harman Robertson with your email addresses and they will then provide you with links to the training. The expectation is that it will be undertaken within 12 months and it's a very flexible system that will enable you and support you in terms of undertaking that training. The report sets out the financial implications. As I say, it's being provided across the committee and the board and certain officers of the fund, and the cost is around £5,000 a year. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. And this is certainly something I very much welcome. It's a really welcome and important contribution to members' training, given all the issues there are with face-to-face meetings these days and ongoing. I think this is a really good addition. And as we've already seen tonight, pensions can get very technical, and it's very important and very necessary to partake of the appropriate training. So it's certainly something I very much welcome. I think the 6 training modules are very well structured. They cover the kind of things I would certainly want them to cover. And I think I'm right in saying that it will kick in from January. Yeah. So as of January, pension committee members, officers, pension board members will have the opportunity to take up this training. So I very much hope that everybody will do that. So all in all, very positive. Councillor Kenny.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, I also very much support the recommendation, because I think it's vital that members of this committee are given the necessary training. In fact, I think the report itself says it's a statutory requirement. There's no point in us sitting here making vital decisions on important issues if we haven't had the training. But on the question of online training as opposed to maybe, courses, I think we need to get a balance. I think there is a role for online training, but I wouldn't want us to get to a situation where all training on pension matters was done online, because I think there are occasions where it is helpful to get together with other people in a room to discuss things, to have workshops, etc. So I think it's a question of getting the balance. But overall, I very much support the recommendation, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Kenny. And just to say, this is an addition to our training programme. It doesn't take away from anything that we already have, including the opportunity for conference attending and seminar training and face-to-face stuff. Councillor Carubia.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a quick one, really, on just for some clarification on 3.10, Peter, where it mentions that if each member completes all the modules at least twice over the contract period, will be demonstrated. Does that mean we're going to do it once a year, or is it an annual thing, or how's that going to work, Pete? It will be once a year, or?
Yeah, that's right, Councillor. We're initially signing up for 2 years, so the expectation is that it should be done annually. Obviously, there are always changes to pensions legislation, as you hear from committee to committee, so the training will be updated to the most recent position on things, so hopefully it will keep us all a bit fresher.
Councillor Green.
Sorry. So, yeah, I think it will be really interesting. As someone who was new to the committee this year, I think it would be useful. I would just, if it is going to supplement, I think that's good, because I think the support we've had thus far, again, the problems with travel and getting away and so on and so forth, because some of the face-to-face have been self-evident, really, in terms of people's circumstances. But I would just put in a bit of a plea again, I suppose, to the Pensions Working Party, which I found really interesting, and I've learned a huge amount, because you've got some really impressive people around there talking about issues that they get and understand and are very good at sharing that information. So your invite for people to attend those, I think, has been incredibly helpful and incredibly informative. And I've, as I mentioned a little earlier, I've learned a huge amount from those events. So again, I think most people do, I think, but if any member, we all get invites. If you can attend them, they are hugely, I've personally found them hugely beneficial. So that's another particular opportunity to learn online, because they tend to be Teams meetings, which is good.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, I haven't got any other indications to speak. So in that case, I'll move to the recommendation that the Pensions Committee be recommended to note the report and support the rollout of the online learning programme provided by Hymans Robertson. I'll propose that. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Rowlands, thank you. Agree by assent. Is that okay with everybody? Very good. Thank you all very much. Okay, we've already done item 9. Item 10 is the Northern LGPS report, and we're recommended to note the minutes of the joint committee meeting that was held on the 8th of July. Can we just take that as read and note the report? Is that okay? Lovely. Okay, thank you all very much indeed. It's too long ago. I cannot remember whether it was sunny or not. Okay, item 11, minutes of our working party meetings. So again, we're asked to, in this case, approve the minutes of the meetings of the Investment Monitoring Working Party from the 15th of September and also the Governance and Risk Working Party from the 23rd of September. So I'll take those individually just to get the procedure spot on. So Investment Monitoring Working Party minutes from the 15th of September. I'll recommend that we approve those minutes. Can I get a seconder from somebody who was there? Adrian Jones, thank you very much indeed. Agree by assent? Thank you. And just to kind of reiterate what we heard previously, that those future minutes to committee are an opportunity for enhanced reporting on responsible investment issues. So secondly, there's the Governance and Risk Working Party from the 23rd of September. Again, I will move that we approve those minutes. Can I get a seconder? Councillor Green, thank you very much. Can we agree those by assent? Very good. Okay, that's the end of the formal agenda. There was just one item of other business I wanted to briefly raise. It's almost 2 years at this committee that we have had no representation at all from Liverpool City Council. And I just wanted to place on note on the record my disappointment that we have not had any member from Liverpool attend. I have written to the Mayor of Liverpool. I have been assured that somebody will be appointed, but I'm still waiting. So I just wanted to highlight that. And if anybody on the committee has any influence with colleagues in Liverpool, I would be very grateful if they could give them the appropriate nudge. But that said, I will draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all.